recording now too.
Great, setting up the live right now. It'll be ready in a couple of seconds.
So when I'll be sharing, Dave, it will unshare your screen as I'll be sharing the video. Just come back right after.
Will I have to reshare my screen?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, cool.
Unless we want to skip the video and go straight to talking.
No,
Okay.
no, don't let me disrupt your system. It's fine.
Fantastic.
All right, welcome everyone. I see people are trickling in. Welcome. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. We're so pleased to see you here. Welcome, bonjour à tous et à toutes. My name is Emily from the Career Advising and Transition Services Office at the McGill School of Continuing Studies. And I'm here today with some members of the CATS team, starting with Rosalia Felice, the manager of the CATS office. If Rosalia, you want to say hello.
Sure. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. I'm
also here with Nayo Gahepi.
Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be in this session.
It's a pleasure to be here. And this is already the third edition of Power Skills. This is our last session, and tomorrow, this is our last session of, tomorrow's already the last day. It's been a magical last few days. And this year's theme, as many of you know, if you've tapped into our other sessions, is Lives Transformed, our post-pandemic era. I'd like to recognize that we at CATS acknowledge that our work in Montreal takes place on the unceded Indigenous lands of the Mohawk Nation. Nayo, did you want to do the video? Yeah. Okay.
Sorry for this. Let me share with the sound. Thank you. So I hope everyone enjoyed this beautiful video. It is also part of our bicentennial celebration here at McGill. It's been 200 years. And we don't just play this video as an intro. So this is something that we put to pay respect to the land and communities on which we are today. We count ourselves lucky to be in their lands. And this is more than just for saying it. I encourage everyone to look into the resources online to add this to your meetings, to your events, to your webinars, and discover a little bit more about the culture that was there before us. So thank you. I'll leave it to you, Rosalia.
Thank you, Nayo, and thank you, Emily. Thank you both, my wonderful colleagues who I value tremendously. It is 8 o'clock here in Eastern time zone. So if you're in our time zone and you're here on a Friday night and you're continuing to learn and grow, that's amazing. Congratulations to you and thank you for being here. But if you think you're doing something incredible, I could tell you that Dave is in the UK where it is now 1:05 a.m. So we are so grateful to have him at this hour. We would be grateful to have him at any hour. I'm going to just read his bio. I don't typically read bios, but I want to make sure I get everything right. I want to tell you this conversation is so relevant and so important as we are a university. We work at Career Advising and Transition Services, of course, and continuing studies at McGill University. And because inclusion and diversity issues are important to us at Career Advising and Transition Services and at the school. And I think it's a really important and fascinating time and where we hope to see some movement. And Dave is certainly going to talk to us about that. So let me read his bio to you, if you will allow me. Dave S.P. Thomas is an occupational scientist with a merit in social justice, diversity and inclusion specialist, and doctoral researcher. He is the lead editor of Doing Equity and Diversity for Success in Higher Education, towards decolonizing the university, a kaleidoscope for empowered action. So obviously we have the right person to talk to us about this important topic, and I couldn't be happier to introduce Dave Thomas, and I ask you to give him a warm and welcoming applause or wave or anything you'd like to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosalia, and colleagues, thank you so much for joining us. Before I start, following the tradition, I just want to pay homage to all those who have done this work before me, the people who are doing this work currently, and the ones who will do this work when I've transitioned onwards. So I really want to pay homage to you. This is really important work. I also want to acknowledge that today is the anniversary of Jamaica's independence. And that's something that's very significant for me, or to me, because I was born in Jamaica. And as you know, Jamaica was a former British colony. So I'm so pleased to be here to share my perspectives with you. And I just want to say thank you again to Professor Kathleen Quinlan. And the research I'll be presenting today is a research that has been conducted by myself and Professor Kathleen Quinlan, who is not here to join us today, but I will present on her behalf. So thank you very much. Okay, so this evening I'll speak for about 30 minutes or 45 minutes thereabouts, and then I'll allow about 15-20 minutes for questions. But if at any point any colleague wants to pose a question, please feel free to do so, and I'll ensure that I address it at an appropriate time. Okay. So I just want to offer a disclaimer, just to say that in this seminar, I'll be exploring the possibility of reimagining a more culturally sensitive curricula. And I believe this is of particular importance as we've seen the disruptions due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we've seen the various insurgents and incursions, and the uproar and reawakening of racialized inequalities, etc. So I think that is really, really important. And it is important to understand how our curriculum, or curricula in plural, has been constructed, and to reimagine a more inclusive and a more culturally sensitive curricula. So conversations that we'll have today will include topics such as race, racism, and racial inequality. And we may have some difficult and emotional and uncomfortable moments, but I sincerely hope you will have the courage to engage in the conversations, and in doing so, be open and honest. When we talk about racism and matters relating to racial inequality, it touches hot buttons in all of us, including me. Being honest and authentic takes guts, but if we do it and stick it out, I genuinely believe that we can learn from each other. And I hope you're willing to take that risk so that we can have that experience together. So I can't guarantee psychological safety in this session, unfortunately. But I encourage you to welcome and respect the diversity of voices and opinions, and pay particular attention to the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color who is currently in the session. I also want to encourage you to be mindful of the impact of what you say, and practice and respect self-care. So I know this is an emotive subject, it can be. So self-care would include having a debrief with someone or colleagues who you trust, just to reflect on the session and explore some of the emotions that was provoked. That's really, really important. So Rosalia has generously articulated my bio, so I won't do that again, but I just want to highlight my pronouns are he and him, and I am intersectional. Okay, so in terms of the session this evening, I just want to clarify some of the terminology that I'll use. So when I speak about curriculum, I'm specifically relating to that which is taught and how it is taught. If I mention the word Black, I'm relating that to people who identify as being of African heritage, and that includes Caribbean heritage. Now, the term BAME, the acronym rather, BAME, is a term that is used in the United Kingdom that generally refers to a group of people who are identified as belonging to a Black, Asian, or minority ethnic background. Note I said who are identified. So I use the term because the study was situated in England. But importantly, I want to point out that this is not a homogeneous group. And this is an identifier that has been imposed on a group of people as opposed to them identifying in that manner. And this identifier is used in governmental and educational research. Then if I refer to the term whiteness, I'm referring to an ideology that empowers people racialized as white and not people who identify as white. References to the term ethnicity relates to a racial group formation process that's based on culture and descent. And importantly, when I mention student engagement in this context, I'm concerned with two of the many engagement variables. That is, students' academic interaction with teachers and their interest in their major subject. Now, references to interaction with teachers relate to any interaction that students would have had with teacher on academic related matters. And positive interactions, as we know, with teachers has been shown to be associated with attainment. And so lastly, when I mention interest, I'm specifically relating to the affective and cognitive engagement with a specific object involving a person-environment interaction. So let me just go through a little bit of the background to this research. So according to Professor Daryl Wingsu, dialogues on race and racism are usually clashes between the racialized realities of one group, for example, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and other group, example, white. Professor Wingsu believes that the conflict and other hidden meanings between racial groups are most likely manifested in what he calls race talk. Now, equally, we've seen that the COVID-19 pandemic has revealed enormous cleavages globally. And while most educational providers transferred learning online, this has seen a limitation in the lack of personal interaction between teachers and students. And subsequently, this has resulted in learning losses, which translates into lower achievement and subsequently significant losses in future income. These inequalities that we've seen are starker amongst Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So we know that insufficient progress is being made to tackle structural racism and systemic inequalities in higher education, and that this has created unacceptable challenges and outcomes for students and colleagues who work and learn in the sector. So in England, where this study is situated, Black and Asian students in particular are entering higher education at a higher rate than any other group. But while they're entering at this high rate, racial disparities in experiences and outcomes, they persist, right? They remain. So despite this increasing access, there are disparities in outcomes between white students and their counterparts. Now, the Higher Education Policy Institute in England has set a number of policy recommendations subsequently to reduce racial inequality in higher education. And these markers and policy recommendations includes attending to the curriculum. The Office for Students in England subsequently also have set targets and key performance measures to eliminate all racialized inequalities in student outcomes by 2030. So in 2015, Anna Mumford Zimdars and her colleagues conducted a piece of research, And the study explored why different groups of students achieve different outcomes in higher education. And they identified the micro, meso, and macro features in higher education institutions as causes of attainment disparities. They highlighted the contribution of the curriculum as a meso contributor to attainment gaps. That is, differences in achievement between different groups. And their study made clear that universities need to attend to structural elements of the environment to achieve equality. And I'm purporting that the curriculum is one such structural aspect. So we've seen that calls to diversify and decolonize higher education curricula have gained traction, given the increased attention to racialized inequalities. And this has promoted a global response by universities to create more culturally responsive curricula. For example, a study by Fids and colleagues in 2021 found that in Australia, universities are developing ways to enact curricular reconciliation to redress historic injustices against Indigenous people. Following that, MEDA in 2020 found that in South Africa, although there has been grassroots activisms around decolonization for some time, there has been more attention to the issue in the wake of the 2015 Rhodes Must Fall protests. So Sean Harper and colleagues conducted a study in 2007, and they found that in the United States, faculty responsible for rethinking course syllabi and embedding cultural diversity in the curricula has been emphasized for over a decade. But it's taking on a new urgency as colleagues and universities adapt to incoming student cohorts that are majority. Now in England, universities are now beginning to respond in a variety of ways by way of a variety of initiatives to create more culturally sensitive and culturally responsive curricula to redress historic educational inequalities. So for example, the Diversity Mark initiative at the University of Kent. Another example is the Decolonize the Curriculum Toolkit at the University of Leicester and the Inclusive Curriculum Framework at Kingston University. So back in 2007, Brooke and Nichols found that amongst 65,000 graduates, controlling for all other factors which impact on attainment, ethnicity is still statistically significant in explaining attainment in higher education. Now the diagram on the left, the chart on the left depicts the attainment outcomes of 6 different groups in UK higher education. And as you can see, the groups that have achieved less well are students from Black backgrounds, and the group that have achieved degree outcomes most optimum are students from white backgrounds. And the chart on the right depicts the entry qualifications with which these students enter the university. The chart on the right here depicts a trend in degrees awarded in UK universities between Black, Asian, and minority ethnic students between 2003 and 2018-19. Sorry, it's the chart on the left. The current gap in degrees awarded is 13.3%. And if this trend continues, the forecast is that the gap will close naturally in the academic year 2070 to 2071. Now, I'm not sure I'll be around at that time. I'm probably not sure any of us will be around at that time, but hopefully we'll get to see that natural occurrence. And the chart on the right disaggregates the BAME category. What it does, it illuminates the gap in degrees awarded between Black and white students and demonstrate that this is the largest gap, which is 22.6% here. It forecasts that based on the current trend, this gap will close naturally if the trend continues in the year 2085 to 2086. Now that is amazing. Unfortunately, I probably won't be here to witness that. Now in the UK, persistent equality gaps have negative consequences for access and widening participation, with UK students from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds less likely to progress to high tariff universities. And that's depicted by the chart on the lower left. But once enrolled, these students experience the highest rate of attrition, the largest rate of disparities in outcomes, and the lowest rates of progression to postgraduate studies, and also unfair outcomes in terms of graduate employment. So that is depicted on the chart in the center, where you can see the disparity between both groups. And on the right, bottom right, you'll see the pipeline, where the higher up you go in terms of studies, the wider the gap gets. You'll also see the gap between professors from white backgrounds and Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds. Now, to reduce these inequalities, researchers have recommended making curricula more culturally sensitive. Further research is needed, I believe, on culturally sensitive curriculum as it relates to students' engagement. Now, we've seen that positive interactions with teachers have been shown to be associated with higher attainment, particularly with BAME students. Yet, BAME students in predominantly white institutions may face barriers in forming positive relationships with their teachers. In Professor Quinlan's study, which we conducted together, we hypothesized that BAME students would report fewer interactions with their teachers, and that more culturally sensitive curricula would improve these interactions. So as I stated earlier, interest is defined as the affective and cognitive engagement with specific objects and affects many aspects of student learning and performance. Students' interest is higher when the curricula is relevant. So in our research, we hypothesize that students who do not perceive the curricula as culturally sensitive would have lower interest. We also hypothesize that making the curriculum more culturally sensitive would improve interaction with teachers and interest by students. Okay, let's move this one forward. So my question to you here, what is a culturally sensitive curricula? And how does this differ from other related concepts? And please feel free to post this in the chat, take a couple of seconds, and just share your thoughts. Okay, let me break the answer to you. So a culturally sensitive curricula is one in which attitudes, teaching methods and practice, teaching materials, curriculum, and theories relate to, recognizes, affirms, and respects students' diverse cultures, ethnicities, identities, and context. That is a lot, I know, but we believe that that represents a culturally sensitive curricula. A culturally sensitive curricula contains positive references. It reinforces feelings of self-efficacy and interest and a sense of agency. As mentioned previously, a culturally sensitive curricula respects all people and it legitimizes knowledge from all communities and all cultures. And ultimately, we believe that a culturally sensitive curriculum may reduce attainment disparities. Okay. So in terms of the conceptual framework which we use, this research is anchored in critical race theory and interest theory. So just under a decade ago, Professor Sean Harper from the United States in his 2021 research found few higher education researchers had taken a critical race theory approach to understanding students or academics' experiences. However, ongoing attempts to study race without racism are likely, I believe, to lead to racial equity or inequity and more complete understanding of minoritized populations in post-secondary education. Instead, to illuminate and accurately reflect the educational experiences of racially diverse students, I believe the field needs racially and culturally responsive theoretical models, constructs, and tools. So critical race theory is a methodological and conceptual framework that illuminates the extent to which racism is structurally ingrained in the curriculum. So a point of note here, when I say racism, I don't mean individual acts of discrimination. What I'm speaking about is the extent to which the systems are designed to advantage one group at the expense of another. So what CRT proposed, or it illuminates the permanence of this racism with whiteness as the norm. And we spoke about what constitutes whiteness earlier on. We're speaking about a system and not a demographic identifier. So CRT also highlights white dominant perspectives that undermine the value and the intellectual worth of viewpoints from other demographic groups. And so whiteness of this curriculum erodes students' engagement, specifically their interest in the subject and, I believe, their interaction with teachers. But in my research, I've found that there are no race-focused instruments yet available specifically to ensure or to measure, rather, the higher education students' perceptions of the cultural sensitivity of their curriculum. And so having found that, I decided to create one. So in terms of the diagram on the right, I hypothesize that students' academic interaction with teachers and their interests are mediated by a culturally sensitive curricula, and in turn may realize outcomes such as improved academic interaction with teachers, improved interest. It may reduce attainment disparities and create, most importantly, culturally competent graduates. So in terms of my research questions, to address these gaps, the study explored the extent to which students, particularly students from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds, perceive their curriculum as culturally sensitive. And secondly, the study explored the relationship between culturally sensitive curricula and students' engagement. And I mentioned previously that that is defined as students' academic interaction with teachers and their individual interest in a subject. So first, we hypothesized that BAME students will experience the curriculum as less culturally sensitive than white students. And secondly, we hypothesized that BAME students will report fewer interactions with their teachers. We asked whether and which aspects of cultural sensitivity of the curricula explain these differences between BAME and white students' interaction with their teachers. And thirdly, we hypothesized that BAME students will have lower interest in their major subject than white students. Finally, we also asked whether and which aspects of cultural sensitivity of the curricula explain differences between BAME and white students' interest in their subjects. So in order to do so, we drew on critical race theory and interest theory and other related instruments. We developed a new set of culturally sensitive curricula scales. And this is key because I believe that the scales that I will explain here later on, I believe these scales make an important conceptual and methodological contribution to the literature about minority ethnic students' experiences and the nature of the higher education curricula. So the substantive results that I offer you here today These results offer a significant and original contribution to the understanding of the impact of culturally sensitive curricula on students. So in terms of the methods that I adopted, obviously I achieved ethical approval. And then after that, participants completed a single survey assessing their perceptions of the cultural sensitivity of their program of study and their interaction with teachers and their interest in the program of study. So the study canvassed the perspective of 262 students, 189 of which were female, 73 were male, 157 were from a Black, Asian, or minority ethnic background, which I deliberately oversampled, and 100 were white. So why did I oversample these students? I deliberately oversampled these students to ensure that I centered their experiences, because these voices and experiences are often erased or muted in educational research. So these students were enrolled in a diverse institution, which comprised of about 37% Black, Asian, or minority ethnic students. And this institution was ranked in the middle of most UK league tables. The majority of students in this study were of African heritage, 99, 15 were Black Caribbean. And though the sample had diverse students, the sample also included smaller numbers of a variety of minority ethnic groups. And these groups are too small to disaggregate in the analysis. So 92% of the students were undergraduates, with the majority in social sciences and humanities. So the teaching staff at this institution, they were predominantly white, and the institution has served primarily white middle-class student body for much of its history. And recently, the changes in demographics at that institution have provided some of the impetus for reimagining the curricula. So participants rated 19 items on a 4-point Likert scale, ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And these items related to their perceptions of the cultural sensitivity of their curriculum. And this was on 4 factors, as I've listed here: whether diversity is represented, positive portrayals of diversity, whether the curriculum empowered students to challenge power, and the extent to which the curriculum promoted inclusive classroom interactions. And in terms of interaction with teachers, participants rated 6 newly developed items on a 4-point Likert scale about their academic interaction with teachers. Now, for individual interest, Professor Kathleen Quinlan's 2019 11-item individual interest scale, this was used to assess interest. And so participants responded to the items on a 5-point Likert scale, ranging from 1 strongly disagree to 5 strongly agree. And they rated items in relation to their program of study. The reliability of that scale was good, as listed here. You can see the alpha. And the items were consistent with Renninger and Heady's 2016 definition of individual interest. And this captured emotional interest in the field and frequent individual, independent, and voluntary engagement. So I think now we're at the more interesting bits. So here we go. So in terms of the culturally sensitive curricular scales, the first dimension, diversity is present. This focuses on how people from diverse backgrounds are referenced in the curriculum. So here I've extracted 2 quotes from students in a research that I've conducted previously. And the students mentioned that the only time we look at non-white material is in relation to colonialism, that is slavery or anti-slavery or extremism. And the material tends to be negative as opposed to positive. And then in the next quote, the student clearly articulated, I want to see more staff that look like us. and for us to know who they are. So these were important factors for students in terms of the representation of diversity. And then if I share some of the sample items with you, so in terms of diversity in present, a sample item that students were asked to rate were, to what extent do people of diverse ethnicities are represented as researchers or professionals and not just participants in research, or clients or customers, etc. So students were asked to rate if they agreed with this or if they didn't. Again, another question that was introduced. The curriculum references different ethnic and cultural traditions, languages, religions, and/or clothing. Thirdly, the curriculum respects that different cultures may have different understandings, skills, and/or philosophies. And importantly, here on the right, I will draw to your attention a chapter from my recently edited book from Michelle Gruy from University of California, who wrote Diversity or Decolonize, What You Can Do Right Now or How to Get Started. So Michelle purported that the presence of diversity is probably not far enough. And we found this in my research. So her chapter corroborated with our findings. And then in terms of positive portrayals, positive portrayal focuses on redressing the assumptions, perceptions, and considerations of people from diverse backgrounds that may distort how they are considered by society. And sample items are when social problems, example, crime and violence are presented, people of color are usually considered the problem. Or when interpersonal conflicts are presented, people of color are usually considered the problem. And a third item, when people of color have problems, white people are usually presented as being able to solve these problems. Now, if I give you an example, I know at one university in their criminology degree, diversity is represented, but generally, Black males are represented as perpetrators of crime and violence. So you can see the problems here. So what we're suggesting here is that we need to move beyond just a representation of diversity to a positive portrayal of diversity. The third item, or the third dimension, challenge power, focuses on the curriculum's ability to provoke critical thought and challenge dominant ideologies. So I introduce my previously edited book here, where students at the University of Kent were empowered to challenge power. Students created a manifesto and presented this to their university as they wanted the university to embark on a process of decolonization. So they presented a kaleidoscope for empowered action by way of a manifesto. So this speaks to the element of challenging power in my set of culturally sensitive curricular scales. And sample items are presented here. The curriculum raises critical questions about power and/or privilege that are usually taken for granted. Or the curriculum encourages students to connect learning to social, political, or environmental concerns. And thirdly, the curriculum encourages students to take action that fight inequality or promote equity. And here I'm introducing a chapter from Professor Les Henry from the University of West London, who speaks to the challenging power aspect of the culturally sensitive curricular scales. His chapter entitled, Who Feels It Knows It? Alterity, Identity, and Epistemological Privilege, Challenging White Privilege from a Black Perspective within the Academy, speaking directly to the dimension of challenging taken for granted power. And the fourth dimension, inclusive classroom interactions, which is ultimately where we want to arrive. And this focuses on the development of a learning environment, accepting of all cultures and accepting of cultural differences and respectful of different perspectives. Ultimately, inclusivity is where we need to be. This is the all-encompassing feature, respecting all cultures, all ethnicities, all perspectives. And I'm introducing a chapter here from my great friend and colleague, Professor Jason Arday from the University of Durham in the UK. And this chapter speaks specifically to our culturally sensitive scale dimension number 4, sowing the seeds, embracing and reimagining a more racially inclusive academy. Again, this is inclusivity. This is where we need to be. So sample items include, my instructors make an effort to pronounce everyone's name correctly. And I'll let that sink in a little bit. My instructors make an effort to pronounce everyone's name correctly. Is this of any significance, any relevance, any importance? In some cultures, names are passed down through generations, hundreds of years, and they have deep historical meanings. My instructor makes an effort to pronounce everyone's name correctly. Making an effort to pronounce that name correctly is really important. And it signifies a respect and an appreciation. My instructor encourages students to be mindful of other students' perspective. Again, very important. Be mindful of other students' perspective. My instructors encourage students to respect other students' perspective. Respect other students' perspectives. So developing an ecosystem of inclusivity, inclusive classroom interactions. So to what extent does the curriculum enable faculty to develop that inclusive environment? And I'm introducing another chapter here written by Professor Hakim Adi, the first Black professor of history in the United Kingdom, and myself. Decolonization or empowerment in higher education. Which is more important? And I'll leave you that question for now. So in terms of my results, BAME students perceive the curriculum as less culturally sensitive on all 4 culturally sensitive curricular dimensions than white students. They reported significantly fewer academic interactions with their teachers and lower interest in their subjects than white students. Ethnicity also significantly predicted interactions with teachers. Simply put, we found that white students reported greater interactions with their teachers than students from Black, Asian, or minority ethnic backgrounds. And we also found that each component of the culturally sensitive curricular scale mediates the relationship between ethnicity and interaction with teachers. Simply put again, white students interacted better with their teachers than students from BAME backgrounds, and vice versa. Each culturally sensitive curricular dimension significantly predicted students' interaction with their teachers. That is, simply put, if diversity is represented more in the curriculum, all students will interact better with their teachers. If diversity is represented positively, all students will interact better with their teachers. If the curriculum promotes cultural understanding and empowers students to challenge taken for granted power structures, all students will interact better with their teachers. And if by way of the curriculum, we create more inclusive classroom interactions, all students will interact better with their teachers. BAME students reported significantly lower interest in their program of study than white students. That was another finding. And each dimension of the culturally sensitive curricular scale was positively correlated with students' interest in their subject. And lastly, we found that diversity represented and challenging power components mediated the relationship between ethnicity and interest. Simply put, if diversity is represented in the curriculum more, and if the curriculum enables students to challenge power, students would be more interested in the curriculum. I'll stop for a drink. So consistent with the central critical race theory claim that the curriculum is normatively white, in our study, BAME students perceive their curriculum as less culturally sensitive than white students on all 4 dimensions of the culturally sensitive curricular scale. That is, whether racial and cultural diversity was represented in the curriculum, how positive the portrayals of people of color were, whether the curriculum encouraged students to challenge power, and the inclusivity of classroom interactions. And then consistent with extant literature, all dimensions of the culturally sensitive curricular scale were associated with students reporting more frequent academic interactions with their teachers. So what we have found, and we have concluded, that when students experience the curricula as culturally sensitive, they were more likely to report interacting with their teachers. BAME students reported less frequent academic interaction with their teachers. And then also, all dimensions of the scales were associated with higher interest. So this finding was partially explained by perceptions of the culturally sensitivity of the curriculum, particularly the lack of representation of diversity and failures to challenge power structures and inequality. So these 2 components may particularly be important for academics to attend to in curriculum design. That is, representing diversity more and ensuring that the curriculum enables students or empowers students to challenge power. And so consistent with previous findings from Professor Kathleen Quinlan's 2019 research, BAME students in our study had lower interest in their major subject than white students. And the findings were partially explained by the perceptions of the cultural insensitivity of the curricula, particularly the lack of representation of diversity and the failure to challenge structural inequalities. So what we believe is that making this curriculum or making curricula more culturally relevant would extend existing utility value interventions, which have also shown to improve ethnic minority students' interest and achievement. So what does this mean for practice? What does this all have to do with a post-pandemic world and how we present higher education curriculum? So the set of culturally sensitivity curriculum scales are intended to promote action by helping teachers and administrators to better understand what culturally sensitive curriculum are and their importance to students. The scales can facilitate an assessment of what is taught and how it is taught through attention to 4 dimensions of cultural sensitivity: the presence of diversity, positive portrayals of the presence of diversity, and the curriculum's ability to enable students to challenge power and also to promote inclusive classroom interactions. So in the process of curriculum revision, educators should reflect on the survey items in relation to their own curriculum and to use the survey with their own students, particularly students from Black, Asian, and or minority ethnic backgrounds, or in US or Canadian parlance, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So these findings support calls for faculty to improve their cultural competence and diversify or decolonize their curricula by advancing practice from performative to active. The findings also suggest that a culturally sensitive curriculum may enhance BME students' interaction with teachers and their interests. So I believe that the development and validation of these set of scales makes a significant contribution to enabling further research on culturally engaging campus environments, specifically on curricula. And I introduce a last chapter here from my recently concluded edited publication, which was written by myself along with an emerging, brilliant legal scholar. And I speak about understanding and interrupting systemic racism. And what we are suggesting here is that a race equality receipt is a mechanism to promote transformational conversations and stimulate actions to redress inequality. So why is this important here? What does this all have to do with the curriculum and the post-pandemic higher education? What we're suggesting here in this chapter is exactly what I've just articulated there. If we make curricula more culturally sensitive, it then means that students may interact better with their teachers and they may be more interested in the subject. This has to be moved from performative to active. Now, in the chapter with Malik and myself, what we're suggesting is to move it beyond statements, to move it beyond invitations to treat, but to actively ensure that curricula are made more culturally sensitive, particularly in the post-pandemic world, to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our students that we serve as universities. We are promoting social justice, and we are meeting our obligations or legal obligations to promote equality and inclusivity. But what Malik and myself have written here is that we need to see the receipts. We need proof that this is happening. Lastly, I want to pay special thanks to Professor Kathleen Quinlan from the Center of the Study for Higher Education at the University of Kent. Also the University of Kent Center for the Study of Higher Education Research Community, to Professor Reinhard Pickrun for advice on data analysis, to lecturers and students who participated in this study, and to various student societies, particularly the African Caribbean Student Society and the Islamic Society. I think without those colleagues, this research would not have been possible. I will leave you with this. Because I'm a dreamer and I dream, because I'm from a place where all of this wasn't happening and I had to learn all of this. So I dream of a place where we can all coexist, an ecosystem where we can all cohabit and bring our full authentic selves to our working environments, to our learning environments. So just for one moment, just imagine how effective it would be if a predominantly white education sector and its members would advocate for diversity and inclusion more genuinely, more thoroughly, more loudly on behalf of those who are disproportionately affected by systemic and institutionalized inequalities. Imagine if we could reimagine the higher education curricula to make it more culturally sensitive as a central part of our COVID-19 recovery plan. Can you imagine what that would look like? Now, the owl of Minerva has flown. And I'm challenging you, not just asking you, I'm challenging you, but asking you can equity and diversity be done for success in higher education now? I'll leave you that question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave, first for sharing your research with us and for being here with us this evening. I have so many questions, and you certainly gave us a lot to think about, and there's a lot to unpack, but I do want to draw your attention to a conversation that was going on in the chat that started with this comment by Adel. Am I pronouncing your name correctly, Adel?
It's Adel.
Adel, thank you, Adel. Do you want to go ahead and talk about your first comment, or would you like me to read it? It's completely up to you.
No, go ahead, because I had several comments. I don't remember what my first comment was.
And the first one, which seemed to have sparked this conversation, it was, in my humble opinion, in terms of challenging power, not all faculty members have the capacity or training to set the container for such discussions. One needs to be able to sit in the tension of discomfort for the purpose of learning. How do we encourage everyone not to be afraid? And this started quite an interesting conversation in the chat. So I was wondering if you had anything to say to that.
Adel, I want to thank you so much for being brave enough to give me and to pose that question. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And that's a really important question, because what we've seen here, we have arrived in a situation where we have some well-intentioned colleagues who want to support the development of an ecosystem where we can all coexist. And it's really important that we empower those colleagues as well. But you're absolutely right. One needs to have the agency to challenge power, but it's uncomfortable. As Eve Tuck and Yang, Canadians, have written, it's not a metaphor. Decolonization is not a metaphor, you know, and it's a tumultuous process. It's a messy process. The lexicon is still being created and we get things wrong. I'm still learning, but we have to be brave. We have to be brave to challenge these structures, because if we don't, we will find that the system that we are now situated in will persist. And so we also have to be brave to get it wrong. I get it wrong sometimes, but also have to understand that with the right intention, if you get it wrong and you're corrected, that is a part of the process of learning. So what I'm saying here, right, in short, answering your question, there's no right time, there's no right answer, there's no right way, and it's not a one-lane highway. There are many, many ways of challenging power. None of them is the right way, but you have to be brave and we have to be strong and we have to support each other. And as Archbishop Desmond Tutu mentions, we have to be generous in our support. We have to be. We have to support each other with love, because that's the only way we'll get out of this, right? I'm not sure I've answered your question, but I hope I have.
Well, I love how you remind us that it's not just a one-lane highway, and that this isn't, and that this isn't just easily tied up in a neat little bow just because we open the conversation, and that the conversation will take more than one sitting to get through. Because when we get uncomfortable, I think we leave the conversation and then the work doesn't continue. So I appreciate the encouragement to keep going and to not be afraid of making the mistake. And I really appreciate you saying you make mistakes too, you're learning. So it opens the container for me to be vulnerable and say, oh my gosh, I don't know everything either, but I want to show like I know everything. So it's great for you to lead by example and saying, come along for the ride. We're going to figure it out together. So thank you.
And if you remember in the opening slide, in the disclaimer, I did invite you to accompany me on the journey. I did ask you to be brave. I did say I can't guarantee emotional or psychological safety. And, you know, so I really, really appreciate your comments. And yes, it is a journey. We will get it wrong sometimes, but this is much stronger than that. So we have to do it together. Sometimes it's a symbiotic relationship, but we can never do it alone. And guess what? inequality that disproportionately affect people more stark from Black backgrounds or Black, Indigenous, and people of color, it's not a BIPOC problem. It's a problem for humanity. Because if one group is losing, we're all losing. So we have to do it together. Come on, fire some more questions at me.
Actually, Dave, I had a question, and there's so much conversation and questions. I was just curious, when you were describing or defining culturally, what a culturally sensitive curricula would be like, you didn't specifically mention history in terms of the recognition and acknowledgement of positive contributions by Indigenous people, people of color. So I was just wondering, is that implied, or is that not? It's not as significant.
No, that is fundamental. That is fundamental. I probably will want to go back to my slide. That is absolutely fundamental, because history, as Professor John Henry Clark tells us, it tells the time of day. It tells us who we are, where we've been, what we've done, what we should do, and where we still need to go, what we still need to do. So history is really, really important. And that is implicit here. And actually, you said that here. I will edit this definition and I will introduce that explicitly, because that is fundamentally important, and it should not be implied, but it should be explicit. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. And I was just curious, because here in Quebec, it starts in elementary school through high school, that our history is literally whitewashed, and I mean of every culture except the dominant culture. So I'm wondering if I know this is for higher education, but does this come with the idea that would also go back to the beginnings, when people first learn about history and people and culture?
Yes, and again, really, really important question, and thank you. So in higher education, we speak sometimes about epistemic apartheid, and we speak about ontology and, the nature of knowledge. Where does it come from? And that leads us to decolonizing methodologies, right? Because what we see is that knowledge systems are pitted against each other. And, what has happened subsequently is a sort of relegation of some knowledges, and this is actually correct language, but knowledges as in plural, a collection of knowledge systems. So some knowledges are relegated to the dustbin of knowledge, and others are elevated as, the all-encompassing. This is the supreme. What we're suggesting here in terms of culturally sensitive curricula is that we need knowledges to be on equal playing field. What we're not doing is condemning any knowledge system to the dustbin of knowledge. That is not conducive of an inclusive ecosystem, which we are supportive of. So you're right. So excavating these histories are important. Reconciling with the colonial legacies and imperial legacies is important. And reparations are also important. So this tool that we've developed here is a framework that enables academics, students, practitioners to reflect on and assess the extent to which their curricula, plural for curriculum, are culturally sensitive or not. Really, really important. So thank you.
Thank you. And we had questions submitted earlier. So before your talk, they were submitted in the Zoom, and somebody in the Zoom session prior to the session, and somebody asked if you had done research to see if curricula in North America and the Caribbean, if they were less or more culturally sensitive than what you studied in the UK, or if you had any comparative analysis.
Again, a super duper question there, right? Because I think that's the next step. So implications for practice, I think what I've suggested, or what we've suggested rather, is that these scales can be amended for use in different settings. And so that would give us a sort of opportunity to triangulate our results and to understand the extent to which curricula are culturally sensitive in different settings. For example, I know that in the North American setting, there are unique, I would say, unique forms of inequalities that are similar, but not the same as the ones that are in the UK. And so as a son of Jamaica, I must say one of Jamaica's finest export, I know that the curriculum there also have a lot of colonial legacy as well. So I think that is really, really important to utilize these scales in different settings, as I said, to triangulate results, and so we can illuminate the variances, the differences, or similarities. So yes, I think that's something that we should be doing in the future.
Thank you. And I know it is now past 2 o'clock there. Do you have a few more minutes? And if you have to go, we completely understand.
No, look, I'm awake.
Okay.
I'm fine.
Okay. Perfect.
I'm fine. I'm fine for the next 6 hours. So
Okay.
do what you need to.
Okay, perfect. So we have a lot of conversation in the chat. I would invite those of you having discussions to please, if you have questions for Dave, now would be the time. Please go ahead and either raise your hand, or Francis said the session is great, and I can't agree more. And I certainly hope we have the opportunity to have you back at the School of Continuing Studies. But Francis, did you have a question? Or
And by the way, sorry, I haven't seen the questions. I think the platform which I'm using, it doesn't allow me to sort of transition between screens. So I haven't seen the questions, so I won't spoil the surprise for myself.
okay.
But what I'll also preface any answer I'm going to provide in saying that I welcome diverging perspectives, because that is how we grow and learn. So I don't want you to agree with me. I want you to challenge me. And also people who don't believe in inclusivity, I also welcome their comments as well, because that's the way we evangelize, right? We don't have to always approach the believers. You know, you can demonstrate efficacy in evangelism if you can convert the non-believer. So I'm quite happy to speak to anyone about any perspective.
Well, we absolutely have to have you back. I think there's been in the chat, it was the consensus that your approach and your eloquence and just the way you started this conversation is just wonderful. And I think it creates a really wonderful environment for us to discuss these issues. So does anybody have any questions? And what happens in the chat and what's great at Power Skills is that people talk amongst themselves. And so there's all of these conversations that have been sparked from things you've said, but please go ahead and write it in the chat or go ahead and say your comments or questions to Dave. And if not, then we will let him go, presumably to sleep at some point at this early morning.
Can I just say, Dr. Thomas, I want to thank you so much for your session. Our faculty is moving on changing our curriculum, and we have an equity, diversity, and inclusion program. And I'm really excited to know that one of my students is here this evening too. We didn't know that we'd be joining. But one of the things that I learned, I'm at McGill University, I'm at the Faculty of Dentistry, but what's really odd is in the United States, they have a pipeline project where they said they wanted diversity of the student body to provide ready care for the community. But we need more diversity in our classrooms. We don't have very many students who are Black. I have a student, a new dentist who is now working in an Indigenous territory, who's originally from Haiti. But she felt really isolated when she was in dental school. And at one point, she was happy, then her father died, and she was just so sad. But fortunately, we had a graduate student who was from Haiti, and she knew her father. So somehow there was that connection. So I think it's a matter that if we can't do it, like if we're not from the same culture, we have to try to reach out for mentors. And if they're not either in the faculty, we have to find community leaders. So I just wanted to know, what did you think of that approach? If we don't have enough diversity, will community leaders help the students?
Well, what you've done now, thank you so much for that question. I really appreciate your question, and I genuinely empathize with your efforts there. But what you've done, you've asked me now to put my public health hat on. And so I agree. movers and shakers, developing rapport and trust with movers and shakers is always very, very important. And that's always the right approach anyway. I think universities should be harnessing their biggest assets a lot more. The biggest assets are the people that come through the doors, right? Whether it's the staff or the students. And these people, if they're from diverse backgrounds, utilize them. It's a knowledge exchange, right? And so if we believe in cultural democracy, if we believe that students and staff travel to our settings with their authentic selves, why would we not ask them to share themselves so that we can have this cultural mix, right? Back to your question, I think reparations is important, right? How do we, how do we embark on that process as universities? If we see underrepresentation of a specific group, to what extent are we actively ensuring that we redress those inequalities? And that speaks back to my book chapter that I wrote with the fantastic Malik, where we said, we're asking for receipts, right? Because, organizations and institutions, they are proclaiming that they are doing diversity. But a receipt would be, we recognize underrepresentation in this demographic group. And because of that, we have actively ensured that we are recruiting for that group. In fact, what we've done, as you mentioned, we are engaging with community leaders in that group. We're having outreach programs in that group. In fact, we're bringing that group into our universities for open days, for taster sessions, bringing in pre-secondary school students, 14, 15, 16-year-olds, come and see what happens in dentistry. And it speaks to, what I spoke about, interest. There are 4 phases of interest, not stages, phases. One is triggering interest. So to what extent can we trigger the interest of a 12-year-old from that underrepresented background if we bring her or him into the faculty of dentistry to observe us for one day? So can you understand what I'm saying here? It moves from, they're all good intentions. We want diversity, but it moves from performative to active, right? And presenting the receipts. We have actively done this. This is what we've done. And being brave to do it, because there's no right way of doing this.
And actually, we've started to do that well before the pandemic. Our students would work with medical students, and we'd have a certain it's a health day, and so we have students who they're Black, Indigenous, people from low-income neighborhoods, also Indigenous, and they go, and it's a health career day, and they go and they see the different health fields. It's not necessarily to have them go into medicine or dentistry, but it's trying to break that cycle of poverty and discrimination to say, you know what, have a dream, and how can you achieve your dream? You stay in school. And so that's what we try to do.
Yeah, when you said that just now, I think that is admirable, and that's certainly the right approach. I like music, right? I was born in Jamaica, so without stereotyping any Jamaican, I can tell you that probably you will like music, right? But the song that came to mind was Tina Turner's 1964 song, Tina Turner and Ike Turner. I can't believe what you say when I see what you do. And so doing that, James Baldwin later on used that, in Paris, right? I can't believe what you say when I see what you do. So having said that, I will say your approach is good because people will see what you do. They actually see that you've done that. And I think it's so important to engage with these communities and ask them about the barriers to entry. Ask them, they'll tell you. I've been lucky, right? And as I said, I'm Jamaica's finest export, God's favorite child. So I've been lucky. And my luck, I've spoken to, in the last 24 months, I've spoken to over 2,500 students. literally face-to-face conversations. And I know that if you want to know something about a student, the easiest way to know that is to ask them. They'll tell you. And if you have developed a program for students without asking them, and you ask them for feedback on that, they'll tell you. If it's rubbish, they'll tell you. They will tell you. So what I'm saying is it's an evidence-based approach. You ask the people who you are designing the services for, and they'll tell you exactly what they need, what their needs are, what are the barriers to entry, and how you can help them. And they'll see what you do, right? So, you know, I would encourage you to keep up the great work. In my opinion, I think you're on the right track. And yeah, we're doing this together. So it's really, really admirable to see the work that you're doing.
I did receive good news today. I'm going to have an equity, diversity, and inclusion workshop for my second-year students, and I have leaders from the Black Community Resource Center in Montreal who've just agreed to be guest lecturers, and they get paid. Listen, McGill, they get paid.
Well, this is it, because, you know, generally, quite sadly, actually, we normally see the people who face inequalities the most are often the ones who have been tasked to solve their own problems for free, right? So the fact that, I mean, how can you pay someone for their knowledge? So the fact that you're providing them with an honorarium, it does demonstrate that you respect their opinion and respect their knowledge. And that is definitely the right way forward.
So please wish us luck.
I think you're all right. I don't think you'll need the luck anyway. I think you're doing fine.
I hope so.
You've been such a generous audience. You know, I haven't had a difficult question this evening. I'm quite disappointed that no one's really, you know, given me that really difficult question. But maybe it's Friday, so.
Okay.
I'm used to hostile audiences, by the way. So.
What do you mean a hostile audience? My God.
Well, you know, as I said before, when you speak about matters relating to inequality and particularly racial inequality, it generally provokes a lot of emotion. And, you know, this is something that it's normal. It is normal, and it's understandable and expected. So, but you've been quite generous today, which is unusual, but it's refreshing. It is refreshing. So thank you very much.
Please go ahead. Is it Addie?
It's Adel.
Adel, sorry.
Right. So I have two questions. One's simple, I think. In the study that you're doing in the UK, I had asked about the students who were in the survey, if they were first or second generation or even third generation UK citizens, and if that makes a difference in how the BAME students perceive themselves and perceive their interactions with their teachers. So that's my first question.
That is a fantastic question, amazing question, and really important, because there are differences between perspectives and perceptions of inclusivity between first generation and second generation students. In my study, I had a combination of first and second generation, and yes, I did see differences. What I would say, even from a position of, you know, of a researcher who, obviously, I've told you, I was born in Jamaica. I spent all of my formative years in Jamaica. The legacy and the lacerations of inequality, particularly racialized inequalities, that's something that I had to learn, you know, and I'm sharing, right? So you've been generous, you've shared a lot with me. So I'll share this with you. For the first 10 years being in the UK, I thought the problem was me. I was confused. I couldn't understand what was going on because, as you can imagine, I grew up in Jamaica, where in the time where I grew up, like race and racism, it wasn't my daily lived experience. So I had to, and it scarred me for a while, because I had to understand that actually the problem wasn't me. The problem was a system that permitted a certain type of behavior. And so once I reconciled that, I could understand genuinely that the way I perceive the curriculum, I would always challenge power. I would always question, because it wasn't normal for me growing up to see inequality in that way. So I would always challenge power. But to answer your question specifically, I think first generation students, unfortunately for a lot of those students in the UK where the study was situated, their daily lived experience is a racialized experience. So when I ask you to, to imagine a future, a lot of students couldn't imagine that because this is what they experience day in, day out. But students who weren't first generation students, they could imagine it because that wasn't their daily lived experience. So yeah, I think there definitely were differences in the perceptions of the curriculum there.
Actually, I found the third question, so I'll quickly ask my second one. In one of your slides, you talked about legitimizing other forms of knowledge. And it made me think of the oral traditions that some of our Indigenous people have, and in fact, other cultures. And I struggle with that because at university level, everybody seems to want a paper, but my knowledge is more than my ability to write. Is that what you meant by legitimizing other forms of knowledge?
Absolutely, absolutely spot on. Linda Tawai-Smith from New Zealand, she speaks about that when she speaks about decolonizing methodologies. I should say Professor Linda Tawai-Smith. And absolutely that, exactly so. If there are any Jamaicans or anyone of Jamaican heritage in this audience, they'll understand Patois is a Jamaican dialect, which some people have tried to convert it to a written dialect, but it doesn't work the same way. And we know that a lot of history has been transmitted through generation, through stories, right? So to what extent is that authenticated as authentic, legitimate knowledge in higher education institutions? So that is around cultural sensitivity, because from a Eurocentric point of view, knowledge is only this specific aspect, this thing. You're writing an essay, it should be in standard English and nothing else. But I posted a chapter there from Professor Les Henry, and for his PhD thesis, he explored reggae music, by the way. There was a CD that accompanied his thesis. So his examiners, in order to understand what was in his 100,000 words, they had to listen to the CD. So you can see how he authenticated a different type of knowledge as authentic knowledge. So you're absolutely right. Oral traditions, we have to recognize that these should be on level footing as our classic theorists as well.
Last one I have for you, because I'm checking to see if there are other hands raised so I don't dominate everything, but I didn't see any hands raised, so I'm going to ask it. So your research was in the UK, and I'm wondering what's your advice to educators here in Canada about how some of these results transfer? Because I'm an elementary school teacher here in Montreal, and at some point, everybody wanted our education system to be like Finland for the young children. Everyone wanted the Finnish system. And yet the Finnish culture and what they value is different from what the Canadians here in Quebec values. And no one was willing to give up, our values of how we parent children, but we want that education system. So what's your advice about transferring your results to our reality?
Again, that's another super question, but we as Rosalie mentioned earlier, we have to acknowledge the impact of history, right? And in an ideal world, you'd want to transfer a methodology from one setting to another, but it just doesn't work that way. You have to appreciate the nuances within that setting, right? And ensure that in appreciating those nuances, you control for some of the factors, but appreciate that other factors need to be introduced. So it's really about ensuring that you approach the research in the correct way and appreciate all the variables in the environment that may, distort the results, because it's never easily transferred. It never works like that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adel, for all your wonderful questions. Truly appreciated. And thank you so much. I think we've taken up almost half hour more of the time than we had expected to. I know I speak on everyone for everyone in this panel when I say this has been wonderful. At this hour on Friday, we're still here talking, and I'm sure we would continue into the night as well. We would love to have you back. Thank you for being so generous with your time and so generous with sharing your research. Is there a way, how could we access your research?
Well, there is I've got 6 papers about this research, but one paper is on my ResearchGate. If you look at my name, Dave S.P. Thomas, you'll find a paper that I've delivered at the American Educational Research Association back in April this year. So there is a paper there with the scales, with a questionnaire and a truncated version of my findings. And later on this year, for anyone who's interested, I can share a 100,000-word thesis with you that speaks about this in greater detail if you have time to read that. But yeah, but that one is on my ResearchGate profile, and I can send you the link, and you can access that paper.
That would be amazing. Yes, and I can send it to the participants. It'd be my pleasure. Yeah, if you send it to me on LinkedIn. Thank
Definitely.
you once again. You're getting very positive comments. This was such, yes, insightful, inspiring. These are all words I'm taking from the chat from this conversation. We can't thank you enough. And there is, yes, people want you to come back and to continue this conversation, and we would love that as well. So we will be in touch. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for being here on a Friday evening after what I'm sure was a long week. Truly appreciated. And I hope to see you. Tomorrow's our last Power Skills day or half day. We invite you to some of those sessions tomorrow as well. And Francis said, let's have you back in person. Yes, that would be amazing. So thank you so much.
Well, I think that I'll be honored to do that. I mean, both brothers live in Canada, one in Halifax, one in Quebec. So I think that would be an easy trip across the Atlantic. So, but thank you so much. I really enjoyed the session, and I've learned a lot from you as well. This is always a learning experience for me. So thank you so much, and keep up the good work. And as I said before, I congratulate you for being brave and for embarking and contributing to this conversation. And I give you all honor, because you are doing this work and you are inspired and have the appetite to do this work. So, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you as well. Have a wonderful evening or continue morning to you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you so much. What a great session. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Francis.